You think your nights are quiet, but shadows move where you least expect them. Silent homes, open doors, faint whispers. What you see isn't always what's real. Tonight, 3 true accounts of officers, dogs, and the unknown. Every step could be your last. Every hallway hides a secret. Are you ready to face the unseen?
I've been a canine handler for almost 9 years. My partner is a 4-year-old German Shepherd named Rex. He's trained in tracking and narcotics detection, and he's rock solid. He doesn't spook easily. I've taken him into warehouses, abandoned houses, and deep woods in the middle of the night. He's always steady. That's why what happened that night has stayed with me. We were called in to assist patrol on a house search after a foot pursuit. Officers had tried to stop a male suspect a few blocks away, but he ran. They chased him through backyards and lost sight of him near a particular property. The side gate to the yard was open, and the back door of the house was unlocked. Neighbors reported hearing what sounded like a struggle in the backyard, which made the situation more urgent. Patrol cleared the first floor, but weren't comfortable declaring the house secure. They believed the suspect may have forced his way inside and could still be hiding somewhere. Rex and I arrived about 20 minutes later. The house was a 2-story place in a quiet subdivision. There were no signs of forced entry from the front. The officers briefed me quickly. No obvious signs of a struggle inside, just the open access at the rear and the fact that the suspect had vanished within yards of the property. I put Rex on a short lead and gave him the search command. He pulled forward immediately. We cleared the living room. Clear. Kitchen. Clear. Laundry room. Clear. Then we moved upstairs. The second floor had a narrow hallway with 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. The air felt stale. All the windows were closed, which made sense because the homeowners were reportedly out of town. We cleared the first bedroom. Nothing. Second bedroom. Nothing. Then Rex pulled toward the bathroom at the end of the hall. The bathroom was small and clean. Nothing out of place. Rex sniffed along the vanity, the baseboards, the tile floor. Then he froze. His ears went forward. His body went rigid. A low growl started deep in his chest. He wasn't looking inside the bathroom. He was staring into the hallway. The growl escalated in a sharp, aggressive box. His focus was locked on something at the far end of the hall. I stepped backward out of the bathroom with him. "What is it?" I said quietly. That's when I saw it. At the very end of the hallway, near the last bedroom door, there was a figure standing there. Tall, dark, completely still. It didn't resemble any of the officers downstairs, and if one of them had come up, they would have announced themselves. "Police K-9, identify yourself." No response. Rex began pulling backward, something I had never seen him do during the search. He didn't want to go down that hallway. "Who is that?" I demanded. Still nothing. Then the figure turned slowly and walked into the last bedroom. Every officer on scene was accounted for. None of them were upstairs. I tried to move forward. Rex planted his feet and pulled back hard. He did not want to go.
I drew my weapon and keyed up my radio. I may have located the suspect in the end bedroom upstairs. Start making your way up. My voice sounded steady, but my pulse wasn't. I pulled gently on Rex's lead and gave him the forward command again. He resisted. Not distracted, not hesitant, resisting. He kept looking back at me like he didn't understand why I was forcing him towards something he clearly did not want to approach. Every instinct in that dog was telling him not to go down that hallway, but I had to clear the room. We moved forward slowly. Rex fought me the entire way, claws scraping lightly against the hardwood floor as he tried to pull backward. His growl never stopped. When we reached the doorway of the last bedroom, he refused to cross the threshold. Flat out refused. He braced himself and leaned away from the opening. I stepped past him, weapon raised, slicing the pie on the doorway the way I'd done hundreds of times before. The room looked empty. Just a bed against the far wall, a dresser across from it. No movement. I paused, listening for breathing, for shifting weight, for anything. Nothing. The window was closed, curtains still, no sign of forced exit. I waited until the other officers reached the top of the stairs before fully entering. Once they were in position, we cleared the room together. Under the bed, clear. Closet, empty. Behind the dresser, nothing. Walls, solid. No panels, no attic hatch, no crawl space access. There was nowhere for anyone to hide, but Rex would not enter the room. He stood in the hallway, muscles tight, staring into the space as if something was still there. One of the other officers tried coaxing him inside. "Come on, buddy." Rex didn't move, not an inch. I've seen this dog track armed suspects into thick woods without hesitation. I've watched him push into dark crawl spaces, abandoned buildings, and chaotic scenes without fear. But that bedroom? He wouldn't step foot in it. We re-cleared the entire upstairs. Bathroom again, other bedrooms again, every closet, every corner. Nothing. After about 20 minutes, I told the team I needed to take Rex outside. As we walked back down the hallway, he kept glancing over his shoulder at that room, like something was still there. The moment we stepped outside into the night air, he changed. His body relaxed slightly. The tension drained out of him. Back at the cruiser, he climbed into his crate and curled up immediately. But he didn't look at me the way he usually does after a search. There was no proud energy, no tail thump, just quiet. Patrol wrapped up shortly after. The suspect was never located. I've replayed that moment in my head 1,000 times. I believe we saw a real person, most likely the suspect, but I cannot explain how anyone could have exited that room without passing us, without opening a window, without leaving any sign. And I cannot explain Rex. If it weren't for him reacting the way he did, I might have questioned my own memory. Some people might say we saw something else entirely, a ghost. I don't know about that. What I do know is this: Rex has never reacted like that before, and he's never reacted like that since.
In law enforcement, you learn to trust your instincts. But if you're a canine handler, you learn something even more important. Trust your dog. Rex has tracked armed suspects through thick woods without hesitation. He's entered abandoned buildings filled with unstable debris. He's worked narcotics searches in chaotic environments, packed with shouting civilians and flashing lights. He has never backed down from a command, except that night. After we cleared the house and the scene wrapped up, I spoke with every officer who had been there. I confirmed positions, entry points, timelines. No one had gone upstairs before me. No one had slipped away unnoticed. No one matched the tall, dark figure I saw at the end of that hallway. And no one could explain how a suspect could vanish from a sealed bedroom with no secondary exit. The official report reflected exactly what we found. Open rear access, unsecured back door, house cleared, suspect not located. Nothing unusual. But reports don't capture moments. They don't capture the way Rex's body went rigid. They don't capture the tone of a growl that comes from deep instinct. They don't capture the feeling of locking eyes with something that doesn't answer when you identify yourself as police. I've worked dozens of night calls since then. Some violent, some routine, some forgettable. That one wasn't. About a week later, I ran Rex on another search, an alarm in a warehouse. He was completely normal, focused, confident, aggressive when commanded. No hesitation. It was as if that hallway had never happened, except for one thing. For months afterward, any time we worked inside a 2-story home, Rex would pause briefly at the top of the stairs before proceeding. Just a second, just enough for me to notice.
Then he'd continue. I don't claim to know what we saw. Maybe it was the suspect slipping away in a way we couldn't detect. Maybe there's a logical explanation I'll never piece together. Or maybe there are things out there that don't respond to commands. I trust that dog more than I trust my own eyes, and if he didn't want to enter that room, there was a reason. Just about every officer I know has at least one call they can't fully explain. That one was mine. When I turned 21, I joined the police force in a small, remote town, one I won't name. The department needed officers, and I was a young father who needed steady income. The timing worked out. Because I was the rookie, I was assigned the night shift, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. The other guys liked to joke that I always got the worst hours. I didn't mind. I've always been a night owl. Most shifts were routine: speeding tickets, occasional DUI, domestic disputes, maybe a break-in alarm. In between calls, I'd sit in my cruiser listening to podcasts while parked somewhere quiet. In a strange way, it was peaceful. About a year into the job, that changed. A severe thunderstorm rolled into town one night, knocking out power across several neighborhoods. Heavy rain flooded major roads, and we staged ourselves strategically around town to respond quickly to accidents. Around 2 a.m., dispatch came over the radio. Our dispatcher, Claire, sounded tense. She reported that an adult male had just called 911, claiming he'd been kidnapped and was being held captive inside someone's home. The call abruptly disconnected. When she tried calling back, there was no answer. My cruiser's onboard computer displayed the address. I was about 10 minutes away, closest unit. "I'll take it," I radioed back. "Start another unit." A newer officer named Chris chimed in and said he was 5 minutes out. Before clearing the channel, Claire hesitated. Then she added something that made the call even stranger. She said the caller sounded like he was altering his voice, almost digitally, and at one point it resembled a young girl. She told us to proceed with extreme caution. That stuck with me. I acknowledged and headed toward the address. When I turned into the neighborhood, I immediately noticed every streetlight was out. The entire block had lost power. The only illumination came from occasional lightning flashing behind thick clouds. Low visibility, bad conditions, unknown threat. Chris was already there when I arrived. His cruiser idled in front of the house. We both stepped out into the pouring rain. The house looked abandoned. The grass was knee-high. Overgrown bushes covered the windows. The roof had missing shingles and visible sagging in several areas. If someone was being captive here, it wasn't a place neighbors would easily notice. "I'll take lead," I told Chris. He nodded. We approached the door together, flashlights ready. When I rang the doorbell, we heard movement inside almost immediately. Footsteps shuffled toward the door, then stopped. Whoever was inside was just standing there, waiting. Cold sensation crept up my spine. I shifted my gaze toward the peephole. Just as I did, a distorted shadow moved back from it, like someone had been watching us and quickly stepped away. "Police department," I called out. "We need you to open the door." Several long seconds passed. Then the lock slowly turned. The door creaked open about a foot. A man in his early 30s peered through the gap. Overweight, receding hairline, thick-framed glasses. His eyes darted between us. I told him we'd received a 911 call from this address reporting a kidnapping. He acted confused, said it must have been a pocket dial. I asked him how a pocket dial explained someone claiming they were being held captive. For a split second, he broke eye contact. Then he said he didn't know anything about a voice. I asked if anyone else was inside the house. He said he lived alone. I told him we needed to come in and check for safety. "Not without a warrant," he replied. That's when things escalated.
These days, getting a warrant doesn't take hours. I walked back to my cruiser, contacted dispatch, and requested communication with the on-call magistrate. Within 5 minutes, Claire came back over the radio. The judge approved a telephonic warrant. It's been emailed to your system. You're clear to enter. I pulled up the warrant on my screen, printed the confirmation page, and walked back to the front door. When I showed it to the homeowner, his face changed. He stepped aside reluctantly. His hands were shaking. The smell hit me the moment I crossed the threshold. Rotting food, mold, body odor, something sour beneath all of it. I scanned the entryway with my flashlight. Straight ahead was a hallway. To the right, what looked like a living room. I cleared the living room first. It was disgusting. Piles of dirty clothes covered the floor. Stacks of unwashed dishes sat on a coffee table. Roaches crawled openly across the walls and furniture. A stained couch sat crooked against one wall like it had been dragged in from a curb. I'd seen hoarder houses. I'd seen drug houses. This felt like something else. I turned back toward the homeowner. He shifted uncomfortably under the beam of my flashlight. I made a mental note to check for narcotics or paraphernalia later. First priority was locating a possible victim. As I stepped into the hallway, my foot struck something plastic. I looked down. It was a pink Barbie dollhouse playset. The exact same one I'd bought my daughter for Christmas the year before. That detail bothered me. I asked him if he had children. No, he said quickly. Sometimes my nieces come over. I keep toys for them. Chris and I exchanged a look. No parent in their right mind would let kids into a house like this. I told him this was his last opportunity to tell us if anyone else was inside. He insisted he lived alone. I moved down the hallway. Chris stayed close to the homeowner, monitoring him. There were 2 open rooms and a closed door at the end. I cleared the first room on the left. More toys, diapers scattered across the floor, children's clothing. In the corner, a large, dark shape hunched forward in a rocking chair. My heart jumped. I drew my weapon, then realized it was a doll. But not a normal doll. It was nearly life-sized, dressed in women's clothing. Its head tilted downward like it was staring at the floor. On the bed beside it were neatly folded piles of women's blouses, jeans, even lingerie, carefully separated by color. The rest of the house was complete chaos. But this room? Organized. Intentional. That contrast made my stomach turn. All clear, I called to Chris. The second bedroom was empty. That left the final door at the end of the hallway, likely the basement. Before I reached it, the homeowner spoke up from behind us. Would you like to see upstairs instead? His voice was tight. I'll check upstairs, I replied, after I check down here. There's nothing in the basement, he said quickly. Chris immediately tightened his grip on the man's arm. He had started trying to follow me. The closer I got to that door, the more agitated he became. I grabbed the handle and twisted. The door opened with a high-pitched squeal. Wooden stairs descended into complete darkness. I shined my flashlight down. I could see only the landing and a small section of floor. From somewhere deeper inside the basement, something rattled. I froze. I heard movement, I said quietly. Behind me, the homeowner started apologizing, over and over. I knew then he was lying. Someone was down there, and I was about to walk straight into it.
I started down the stairs. Each step creaked under my weight. The basement air felt damp and heavy. The rattling sound grew louder the farther I descended. Behind me, the homeowner kept repeating, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry." He wasn't apologizing to us. He was apologizing to whoever was down there. When I reached the bottom landing, I swept my flashlight across the room. Concrete floor, exposed beams, stacks of boxes, old furniture shoved against the walls. Across the basement was another door. The rattling was coming from behind it. I drew my weapon and aimed at the door. "Police, if anyone is inside, come out slowly with your hands up." The rattling stopped instantly. Silence. I repeated the command. Nothing. I moved carefully across the basement, stepping around boxes, keeping my sights trained on the door. My heart was pounding hard enough that I could hear it in my ears. I positioned myself off to the side of the frame in case someone tried to shoot through it. Then I grabbed the knob and twisted. I swung the door open fast and stepped back. For several agonizing seconds, nothing moved. Then I aimed my flashlight into the room. What I saw in there is something I'll never fully forget. A man, mid-40s, gaunt, pale, shaking. He had been restrained.
He looked like he hadn't seen daylight in a long time. He didn't move at first because he was terrified. Later, we learned he'd been missing for nearly 2 years, a father of 3, a respected member of the community. Everyone believed he was dead. Earlier that night, when the homeowner brought him food, he accidentally left his phone behind. The captive managed to activate Siri and call 911. When dispatch heard the voice, it sounded distorted, childlike. It wasn't digital. It was conditioning. The homeowner had forced him to speak in a high childlike tone for so long that it had become his default voice under stress. When I ordered him to come out, he froze, not because he couldn't move, but because he didn't want me to mistake him for a threat and shoot him. Once I saw him clearly, I lowered my weapon and called Chris down immediately. The homeowner was arrested on the spot. EMS transported the victim to hospital. He survived. I still think about that detail Claire mentioned on the radio, the voice sounding like a young girl. If he had been forced to speak that way for years, what else had he been forced to do? We saved him that night, but some damage doesn't disappear just because someone is freed. I've worked a lot of calls since then, but that one changed how I listen. Now, when something sounds off, even slightly, I pay attention. Because sometimes the smallest detail is the only reason someone survives.
I've been a patrol officer for a little over 8 years now. Most of that time has been on midnights. You see a lot working nights. Domestics, DUIs, break-ins, overdoses. After a while, the calls start blending together. You show up, separate people, take a report, maybe make an arrest, and move on. But there are a handful of calls that never leave you. This was one of them. It happened in late October a few years ago, around 2:40 in the morning. Dispatch toned me out for a 911 hang-up. The caller reported hearing a woman screaming for help inside the house next door. By the time she dialed 911, the screaming had stopped, but she was certain of what she'd heard. The address was on a quiet residential street, single-family homes, clean yards, minimal police activity. I was about 5 minutes away. When I pulled up, the street was completely silent. Most of the houses were dark. A light rain had started to fall, just enough to make the pavement shine under the streetlights. The house in question was a 2-story home with a small front porch. From the street, I didn't see any lights on inside. I parked a few houses down and approached on foot. As I got closer, I noticed the front door was slightly open. That immediately put me on edge. I radioed dispatch. On scene, front door is ajar. Start another unit. Backup was at least 10 minutes out. I stepped onto the porch and listened. Nothing but rain. I knocked on the door frame and announced, "Police department." No response. I knocked again, louder. Still nothing. With a report of screams and an open door, I had exigent circumstances. I pushed the door open slowly and stepped inside. The living room was directly ahead. Everything looked neat. No signs of forced entry. No overturned furniture, no broken glass. Too normal. I cleared the living room first, checking corners and behind the couch. Then I moved into the kitchen. Clean countertops, a sink full of dishes, a glass of water still sitting on the table. That detail stuck with me. It meant someone had been there recently. "Police department, if anyone's here, make yourself known." My voice sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet house. I rarely get nervous on calls anymore, but something about this place felt wrong. I moved down the hallway toward the back of the house. On the right was a small bathroom. Clear. On the left, a guest bedroom. Clear. At the end of the hall was a staircase leading upstairs. As I stepped onto the first stair, I heard it. A faint shuffle from above, like a foot dragging across carpet. I froze, drew my weapon, and continued up 1 step at a time. The upstairs hallway had 3 doors. 2 were closed. 1 was slightly open at the end. As I reached the top, I heard another soft movement from that direction. I announced myself again and ordered whoever was inside to show their hands. No response. I approached the open doorway and pushed it wider with my foot. It was a bedroom. The bed was unmade, sheets hanging off the side. A lamp lay knocked over on the floor beside the nightstand. That was the first clear sign something was wrong. I cleared the closet. Empty. Checked under the bed. Nothing. The window was closed and locked. No obvious escape route. But the uneasy feeling in my chest was growing stronger. I stepped back into the hallway and moved toward the second bedroom. It looked like a child's room. Toys on the floor, posters on the wall. No one inside. That left 1 door.
The bathroom. As I approached it, something caught my eye on the carpet outside the door. A dark patch. At first I thought it was a shadow. Then I crouched and touched it with my gloved hand. It was wet. Blood. Not a large pool, but enough to matter. My heart rate spiked instantly. I radioed dispatch to expedite backup. Then I reached for the bathroom handle.
I pushed the bathroom door open and flipped the light switch with my elbow. The overhead light flickered on. The shower curtain was closed. There were streaks of blood on the tile floor leading toward the tub. I stepped closer, weapon raised, and pulled the curtain back in one motion. The tub was empty. But there was more blood near the drain. Not splattered, but pooled, like someone had been standing there bleeding for at least a few moments. I checked behind the door, inside the cabinet, even inside the laundry hamper. No one. By now, backup was still several minutes out. I was alone in a house with fresh blood and no victim. I moved back into the hallway and did another sweep of the upstairs, slower this time, methodical, checking angles more carefully. That's when I heard it. A faint sound from below. A floorboard creaking under weight. It came from the first floor. I turned toward the staircase and aimed my flashlight down into the darkness. The living room was still dark. I couldn't see movement. But I felt it. That sensation like someone is watching you. I descended slowly, keeping my weapon trained ahead, controlling my breathing. At the bottom, I cleared the living room again. Clear. Kitchen again. Clear. That's when I noticed something I hadn't before. Near the refrigerator was a narrow door I had assumed was a pantry. It was slightly open now. I was almost certain it had been closed earlier. I approached carefully and pulled it open wider. It wasn't a pantry. It was a narrow staircase leading down into a basement. There was a light switch at the top. I flipped it. Nothing. Either the bulb was burned out or power wasn't running to the basement. I radioed again. Going into the basement. Waiting upstairs while someone potentially moved below me wasn't an option. I started down. The basement was unfinished. Concrete floors, exposed beams, stacks of boxes along one wall. As I stepped off the final stair, my flashlight being landed on something in the center of the room. A metal folding chair. And beneath it, a large pool of blood. Much more than what I'd seen upstairs. Zip ties were still attached to the armrests. They had been cut. That wasn't an accident scene. That was a restraint. My pulse bounced in my ears. I swept the room again. That's when my light caught movement in the far corner. A dark figure bolted behind a stack of boxes. "Stop! Police!" I shouted. The figure moved fast, heading toward the back wall where a small window sat near the ceiling. I sprinted toward them, navigating around boxes and old furniture. Then I heard glass shatter. By the time I reached the corner, the window had been smashed. Whoever it was had forced themselves through it. I climbed up and out after them, slicing my hand on broken glass in the process. Outside, the rain was still falling. I saw a dark shape sprinting toward the alley at the end of the block. I gave chase. But once they turned the corner, I lost them.
Backup arrived within minutes. We set up a perimeter and called in K9, but the rain had already washed away most of the scent and any clear footprints in the alley. Detectives responded, and the house was processed as a full crime scene. The home belonged to a man who lived alone. He wasn't there. We found his wallet upstairs on a dresser and his phone sitting on the kitchen counter. There were clear signs he had been restrained in that basement chair. The blood collected from both upstairs and the basement matched him. There was a lot of it, but not enough to confirm he died there. The neighbor who called 911 insisted she heard a woman screaming for help. We never identified any female connected to that address. No evidence suggested that anyone else officially lived in the house. So who was screaming? And who ran from the basement? The missing homeowner was never found. The case is still technically open.
I've replayed that night more times than I care to admit. If the suspect hadn't knocked over that stack of boxes, if I hadn't heard that faint movement, I might have walked out of that house thinking it was a false alarm. Just a 911 hang-up. Just an open door. Just nothing. Instead, I walked into what was clearly a violent struggle, either in progress or just moments too late. Sometimes I wonder if I interrupted something before it was finished, or if I arrived after it was already over. Every once in a while, I drive down that street during patrol. A new family lives there now. I see kids' bikes in the driveway, Halloween decorations in October, Christmas lights in December. It looks normal, completely normal. But I know what that basement looked like. I know what that chair looked like. And I know that sometimes the worst things don't happen in abandoned houses or dark alleys. They happen in the most ordinary neighborhoods, behind doors that look just slightly open.